Hi everyone, welcome back to the Hobby Collab. My name is Saray, and today I'm going to be showing you how to paint up some Helsmiths of Hashut, aka the Chaos Dwarfs. We have a bunch of cool lessons for you today in this video. We've got some pre-shading, how to paint some gray skin, well, grayish blue skin, and my new favorite way to paint fire. So if you enjoy any of these lessons, or if you learn anything, make sure you like, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your enemies, leave any comments or questions below. Also, I'd like to say thanks to GW for sending this stuff over early so we can get this tutorial out for you right on time. And with that, let's hop into the video. All right, so let's start with the green armor. And for this, we're gonna start with pre-shading, and we're gonna take advantage of some transparent paint, specifically contrast paints by Citadel. So we start with a black prime or black base coat, whatever you can manage, but then we're gonna grab a white ink, and we're going to do some volumetric highlighting or zenithal highlighting, whatever you prefer. Basically, whatever we wanna do with this white is we wanna emphasize the shapes no matter what technique you're using. I like to use volumetric because it really emphasizes those shapes. But a zenithal highlight is also good because it just means you catch the top surfaces of the model, and those are what should be brightest anyway. What you want to do is the areas that you want to be the brightest, you want to be the most opaque. And that's because when we move on to our next paint, Striking Scorpion Green by Citadel, the areas that are the most white are going to be the most vibrant and green in this case. And the areas that are less saturated, a little bit darker, are going to be less saturated and darker. So that's how you end up with these dark greens and bright greens, even though it's the same paint, right? Just because of the opacity of white with the undershade, or the pre-shading. So then you're gonna wanna move on to reinforcing those shadows. This is Karandras green. This is another contrast paint. And you can see here I'm demonstrating on a flat piece here. This is a banner. Reinforcing those shadows, adding a little bit more green, just spraying towards the bottom in the areas that are already shadowed. It's a little bit harder to see, obviously, because I'm spraying a transparent paint into a dark area, but what this is doing is it's giving a little bit more green saturation to those shadowed areas, as well as bleeding slightly into that Striking Scorpion Green, the area that was more gray when we were doing our pre-shading. This just adds a little bit more color and reinforces those shadows. Actually not a super necessary step, but I think it enhances the overall final effect. Then we're gonna move on to blocking in some colors. I'm gonna be painting their cloth black and the trim black, so there's gonna be a lot of, it's gonna be a predominantly green and black scheme. And right now we're just blocking these in to deal with them later. We're not gonna finish these up right now, but you might as well knock these out to give you a good idea of what the model is gonna look like in the future. See if you wanna change any of those volumes that you've had, if you feel like, okay, maybe I didn't make this area enough green. Now that I see it in contrast to the black, you know, this is your chance to go back and address it now. Because once you start applying paint by brush, you know, you don't wanna find out too late that you didn't make it quite green enough. So here's what it looks like when it's blacked out. See, you can see how helpful it is just to see what it's gonna look like when you know, not everything's green, because, you know, that's not how it's gonna turn out. You wanna do this to make sure you get those volumes figured out. All right, moving on to Flesh and Bone, we're gonna do some grayish skin here. This is Eshin Gray over a black prime. Now, a lot of these models don't actually have that much flesh showing, but you do have these, for some reason, shirtless guys, so here's a good model to demonstrate it on. So over Black Prime, Eshin Gray, give it a couple of coats, make sure you get a solid base coat going. You know, I was kind of, I was playing Oblivion Remastered at the time, so you can kind of see where, if you know what Dunmer are, or Dark Elves and Elder Scrolls, you can kind of see what my inspiration was. And into that Eshin Gray, we're gonna mix some basalt gray, or any light gray that you have on hand, as long as it's a cold gray. You don't want a warm gray for this. And basically, I'm putting the model directly under a lamp to see where the light falls, and I'm basically using that as a guide to where I should be placing my highlights. You know, it's not exact, but it's a good guide. I think if you're unsure about where to place highlights, this is the best and easiest way to do it. So here's a good example. If you look in the crook of his elbow there, you know, in my mind that area would be shadowed, but actually looking at it under a lamp, that's one of the brightest highlighted areas. And I would have never noticed that unless I'd, you know, used the tools around me, in this case, a light. Now, if you don't have a nice lamp to do this with, you just, you know, if you have a smartphone, you can flash your light directly above it and take mental notes of where, you know, the light is reflecting the most. Also, I want to point out that I'm not spending a ton of time on these. You know, they're pretty rough highlights here. And, you know, this is for army painting. You know, this is not going to be award-winning painting here. But, you know, that doesn't mean we shouldn't spend a little bit of time, you know, at least working on these techniques, if not perfecting them right now. This is basalt gray. This is the stuff we mixed into the Eshin gray. And this is going to be the highest highlight. Again, using the top-down lamp as a guide. Doesn't have to be perfect. If you're unsure about, you know, you don't want to bother with this, you could just give it a dry brush and it would look fine. You know, you will lose out on some of those finer details, like I said, like the crook of his elbow there actually being quite bright. You will miss out on that if you do a dry brush, but you know, if you just want to get it done quick. So then we're going to go in with Eshin gray and start glazing in. That is, I thin this down heavily with water. I'm just smoothing out the transitions between the highest highlight and the darkest dark, which is Eshin gray itself. So this is where we are. You can see it's like not super smooth in terms of highlights. It's actually kind of rough. Again, it's fine. We're not trying to make this we're not trying to win any awards for painting skin here. But then we're going to use Coelia Green Shade. This is a shade by Citadel. This is like a bluish green turquoise wash. And we're just going to apply this thin down, probably 1-to-1 with medium to paint. You can use glazed medium or Lahmian medium, which is just glazed medium. And apply it over the entirety of the skin. And this will help smooth out any of those rough transitions, kind of tinting everything blue. Now, what I didn't bother to do, when it came to these models, the Infernal Cohort, I just went with the highest level, the basalt gray, and then gave it a wash. The reason for this is because, you know, there's actually so little skin showing that it wasn't really worth going through the steps with the Eshin gray and the mixes and the glazes. It just wasn't worth it. But while you have that Eshin gray out on your palette, go ahead and highlight the most protruding parts of their beards here. This is just, we're going to end up putting a contrast paint over this, keeping this very basic. You don't actually even have to use gray. You could use white or whatever you want. I just used Eshin gray or whatever gray I used, because I had it on my palette. Then we use Gore Grunt to Fur. This is a kind of reddish brown contrast paint. This is used straight out of the pot, not thinned down. And we apply it fairly thickly over the beards here. And, you know, once it dries, it'll give this kind of brownish. As for their tusks, we're gonna use Steel Legion Drab or any like khaki color you have on hand. And then we're gonna use Carrick Stone to highlight tusks, just focusing on, you know, the painting the front of the tusk so that we get that nice shape. Then for the lip, we're gonna use the Fang. So I actually started out painting their lips a pink color and it just wasn't working. I tried going through various fleshy tones and I didn't like the way it looked. So we're gonna give them blue lips. In this case, the Fang, which is kind of a purpley bluish gray color. And then we mix in a little bit of basalt gray into that, probably about a 50-50 mix, and just highlight the front of the lip. And it looks, decent. Very quickly on the eyes, I'm gonna use Corn Red to base coat it, and then I'm gonna highlight it with Mephiston Red. I didn't bother filming it because it's just not that interesting, but base coat Corn Red, highlight Mephiston Red. Now we have our Dunmer looking dwarves. Now we're gonna move on to the cloths, plural. The sashes are primed black or base coated black as we did before. And then we're gonna move on with Corvus Black, which is essentially a black gray. It is very subtle in terms of the differences. That's actually what we want. We don't want the gray to overpower the black. And basically what I'm doing here is I'm doing the same thing I did with the skin, in that I'm using a top-down lamp to just, you know, to look where the light's falling. It's a little bit more clear on the back of the sash here. You can see right where that, you know, where does it look like it's gray and white? And that's just where you're gonna apply your paint, making sure you leave that black in the shadows so that you get, you know, it still looks black even though we've went ahead and defined the shapes that are present. And then we're gonna move on to Eshin Gray and just do a slightly thinner highlight to finally, you know, finish this up. And then if you want to go for anything real sharp, you can go up one more layer with basalt gray, but I would save this for the sharpest highlights, like only the very top as you can see here, what I'm doing, I'm just painting the top of that sash there. And the reason for that is that, that was noticeably brighter than the rest. Be very sparing with that. And then if I wasn't happy with any of the transitions, I went ahead and got some black glaze that is, black heavily thinned down with water, and then just glazed it onto the transitions. For the skirts, aprons, and hafts of the weapons, I went with Burgundy. Now, I didn't show it in this video, but for the hafts of the weapons, I just ended up putting a contrast of Sigvald Burgundy over those and leaving them be. But for the actual leather apron skirt things, we get a little more involved. And so what we do is we grab Burgundy, which is what we base coated with, and add in a little bit of Mephiston red. And again, utilizing this top-down lamp or top-down light source to give us a guide as to where to place these highlights. I really want to emphasize that you don't need to be exact. It's just giving you an idea of where the highlights would be. You don't have to be perfect with your transitions or volumes or how bright and contrasted everything is. It's just a guide. And then you add in a little bit more Mephiston red. Previously the ratio was 2 parts Burgundy to Mephiston red. Now it's probably a 1-to-1 mix. And again, just using that light as a guide. If you're not comfortable with that and you don't want to do that, what you can do is just focus on the parts that are protruding that would catch the most light, right? So I think it's pretty intuitive to think that fold there would be catching light because it's protruding out from the rest of the apron, and that would be fine if you don't want to bother. Again, dry brushing would be at least decent here because so much of the brighter paints would be caught on the protruding parts of the apron here. You would want to make sure you're going a little bit lighter with that dry brush though, and make sure you're not over brushing because then you end up having to rework later, which is what we don't want to do. Now for the weapons and trim, I wanted to keep this black and green look going, so we actually keep the trim black. That is the trim of the shoulders there, the trim on the shield, and the little hats here. I'm using French Mirage blue to do some sketchy edge highlights. Now, you might notice something here, and I think this is actually a good lesson on how you can use a lot of similar colors, but still give them each a distinct look. So right, I have the skin, which is like bluish gray. I have their sashes, which are black with a highlight that's bluish gray. And then the weapons and metallic, or what should be, hard surfaces of the trim are also black with metallic. But you notice they all look different because of the way we paint them, right? The sash there, because of the way it's highlighted, looks like cloth, whereas the black metal, which it's the same colors, right? We're using very similar colors. They're even base coated the same color, but they look differently because I'm doing this chippy edge highlighting on the edges. So despite the fact that the colors are pretty much the same, they read as different. At least I hope they read as different. Maybe you disagree and think they look like all the same. And even the skin, right, is in the similar color range. For the weapons here, you don't need to do this with an airbrush, but I did. You could do this with a dry brush. I create a gradient going towards the top of the weapons, just because I thought it looked cool. Again, there I was breaking my rule about using the light top-down lamp as a guide. I just did this because I thought it looked cool. But again, same as the trim, we're going to use sketchy edge highlights to give this chipped, slightly worn look, because I think it makes it read as a different material than the other pieces. Obviously, if I did this style on the sash, the black sash, it would look a little odd. Here we are. We are done with that, and we're gonna move into fire and gems. And this is probably this is gonna take a while, but I think it's worth it. It's my new favorite way to paint fire. I've never liked painting fire and just a red to yellow gradient. We're gonna start with corn red. This is a dark red. We're dealing with a 3-dimensional fire here, but the problem with that is that fire is constantly moving. It's very dynamic, so I felt like I never captured the fire well, but I think this kind of does a decent job. Now we move on to Mephiston red. And what we're gonna do is basically paint a bunch of squiggles, bunch of squiggly S's that move towards the top of the flame, right? We paint these lines a little bit thicker, a little denser towards the base, and then they thin out and become less frequent as we move towards the top of the fire. Now, obviously, this is much easier to do. See, here's after the layer of Mephiston red. It's much easier to do this on large flames like this. Might be a little bit more difficult on small flames, you'd think, but actually, I accomplished a similar effect on the smaller scale stuff. This is Mephiston red with Wild Rider red. Wild Rider red is a little too orange, so you definitely want to mix in some Mephiston red to get this kind of in-between color. And so what I'm doing now is in between those, inside of those previous squiggly S's of Mephiston red, I'm painting a thinner line of this mix, which is, again, a 1-to-1 mix of Mephiston red and Wild Rider red. These are both by Citadel. If you don't have access to those, Wild Rider red is a very orangey red paint. Vallejo Scarlet is a good substitute if you don't have access to Citadel. And that's where we are after that layer. And now this is just pure Wild Rider red. And this is where it really starts to come together once you start introducing this more orange color. And you can see I'm trying to stay within the previous thick squiggly S's that I was painting before, concentrating these thinner squiggly lines towards the bottom and thinning them out, making them less frequent as we move towards the top of the three-dimensional, sculpted flames. We're basically freehanding flames on three-dimensional flames, but I think it looks all right. So this is where we are after the Wild Rider red. We're not done yet, though. Sorry, I did say this takes a while. This took pretty much a whole painting session. We're gonna move on to Troll Slayer orange, which is it's still a quite reddish orange, but I would say it's solidly orange, whereas Wild Rider is kind of like, is it red or is it orange? This is solidly orange. It's just quite saturated still. Same idea. Concentrated more heavily towards the bottom. The lines are even thinner now. At this stage, though, this is actually where you want to start maybe skipping up. So we've been, following straight in the lines of these S's, but what I'm starting to do now is, I'll start at the bottom of an S, and then I'll skip the midsection and then paint a little bit of orange at the top, because, it looks like the flame's like licking upward. And then right here, we're gonna do Phalanx yellow, which is like a very bright yellow, mixed with that previous layer of Troll Slayer orange. And now we're gonna be very sparing. We're starting to get much more selective where we put this yellow, but this is really where it starts to look like fire. So again, sounding like a broken record, thinner lines than before, concentrated more heavily towards the bottom of the sculpted flame, almost non-existent as you go towards the top, but occasionally you want to put like maybe the tip of a sculpted flame with a little bit of yellow, so that it looks like, the fire is, gone up and then it's about to turn to smoke as it, peters out, as it starts to burn out towards the top. I don't know if that's the correct term, but this is quite a lot of paints. Obviously, you don't have to use the exact ones I've got here though. Phalanx yellow, again, broken record. Sparing towards the bottom, very selective. Now it looks pretty decent here after that yellow, but we're not finished, and I feel like this looks good, but this next step is what really sets it off. And I know it's kind of annoying because a lot of people don't like using inks. So we've got 3 inks here. We've got Flame Red, Brilliant Yellow by Dollarani, and then Carbon Black by Liquitex. And this is a transparent paint, kind of like the contrast. So all we're gonna do is we're gonna start with Flame Red, and the middle upward, we're gonna spray a thin layer of this red ink. Now don't apply it too heavily. You still want your marks you've made of those oranges and yellows going through to show through it. As you can see here, I'm not fully covering it. And then towards the bottom, you want to put this brilliant yellow ink, especially over the yellows, because I feel like yellows just are never bright enough. You want to apply this towards the bottom of those yellows. Of the sculpted flames, where the yellow should be more heavily concentrated. Now I'm doing it with an airbrush. Absolutely do not need to do it with an airbrush. I ended up doing it with a hairy brush later anyway, on another model. Totally doable, don't need to use an airbrush. I don't know why I did in this video. Anyway, and then towards the very tips, carbon black, or any black. I like black ink because it's slightly transparent still, and then it looks, you just paint it towards the tips, and you get this nice, like, it looks like the flames burning out, turning to smoke. And there we go. This is my new favorite way to paint flames. I hope you like it. It was a lot of fun. It wasn't fun to paint, it was a pain in the butt, but I think it looks good. Moving on to gems, we're gonna use Mephisto on red over black. These models, the infantry, don't have any flames on them, but I wanted to make them look cohesive, so all their gems are gonna be kind of this fiery scheme. So Mephisto on red, which is the brighter red. It's not the corn red that we started the flames with. Then we're gonna use Wild Rider red. We're not mixing it this time. And in this crescent of these gems, we're gonna paint a smaller proportion of Wild Rider red, and then we're gonna move on to Troll Slayer orange. Again, a smaller line, making sure we leave some of that previous layer of Wild Rider red showing, but we're still covering a good amount of it. And then Phalanx yellow, just on the very edge of the diamond gem, whatever these are. Just a tiny, just literally just a line, an edge highlight of yellow. You could even just do a dot at the bottom. You don't want to overpower with this yellow. And then in the top left, whatever your preferred white ink or white paint is, you can use ink, you can use acrylics, whatever. Just put a dot in that black area so it looks like we have this nice shine going on. There we go. Now you have, so there's some fire right there. See, it works on smaller scale. Let's move on to metallics. So this is Decayed Metal by Scale 75. I don't know if this company exists anymore, but any dark metal will do. If you feel like you have like a brass, throw in some brown to give this effect. Then we're gonna move on to Rusty Gold. This is by AK. Kind of an old gold, antique gold, is a good substitute if you don't have this exact paint. We're gonna use that to shade, and then, we're gonna use that to highlight, and then to shade, we're gonna use Coeli Green Shade, the same one we used on the skin. We're trying to keep the colors, somewhat cohesive here. This should give you kind of a verdigris, almost decayed look. And then we return with that Rusty Gold and just do a little bit of selective selective highlighting on some of the pieces here. All right, we're getting towards the end here. We're gonna use oils and pigments now. So first, oils. This is Dark Brick Red by Abtong 502. This is an oil paint. You're thinning this down with mineral spirits to a wash consistency. Very thin, actually. And you're gonna apply this to all the hard metal surfaces that are black. So that means this little part of their hat, their weapons, and their shields. You're also gonna apply it to some of the grain, but be a little sparing with it. You can see how I'm doing it here. It's just letting it run into the recesses there. Now, the reason I'm doing this red, rusty, orange, whatever color is I'm gonna be basing them on like red Martian style bases. If you were to be doing them on like a brown muddy base, you would wanna do a brown wash. Now they have these runes on these Infernal Dominators, and I use a white paint. You can also use a white ink here, but this is a white oil paint, Snow White by Abtong 502. I like oils because they flow into recesses really nicely. Sorry, it's a little out of focus. Bad camera work. Once those are dry, give it a day. Come back with a bright yellow ink. This is Lemon Yellow by Dollar Rowney. And just apply this ink into those white recesses. If you get this ink outside of, if you flow outside of the white rune area, just wipe it off. It's transparent enough that it won't, you won't see it, and it takes a while to dry anyway. So this will give you this nice glowing look to these runes. And then I've already went ahead and based them. That was not interesting, so I didn't film it. I just dipped them in some Martian base. But then I come back with a dark ochre red pigment. This is by Vallejo Pigments. And towards the bottom of their feet, the bottom of their shields, just add a little bit of pigment so it looks like they're really integrated into their bases. I even get a little bit on their sash. And with that, we're gonna call it done. And this is what we should be left with. I'm so happy that Chaos Dwarfs are back. I was super happy to paint them in this bright green. I feel like, I think when we think of Chaos Dwarfs, we think of that red and black or whatever, but I really think that this bright green actually works quite well for them. They kind of look like salamanders if you're familiar with 40k. That was not intentional, but I guess green and fire just work together, and black skin, or like grayish black skin, it just works. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you learned something. If you did enjoy it, again, please like, subscribe, tell your friends. Make sure you check out our other tutorials. We also play this game, actually. We play this game of Age of Sigmar. Did you know there's a game associated with this? We play these. These will be on the table soon after this video, or maybe the same day. So if you want to see these guys in action, a whole army of them, not just the ones that we see here painted, make sure you check out our other videos on this channel. I think that's going to be it for me. Hope you enjoyed. With that, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.